So this, again, today is a little bit of review. You can see this is from ETSI year 4, day 2. We talked a little bit about the amygdala, and you discussed the paper and the amygdala and memory. We're going to be talking today about emotions and review some of the material that we've done before and talk about how we can incorporate this into our teaching.
Tanda chitsude tai thwana shin tanda dela ya ten shabati tanda nga su emery to boch senrili ram grwa lu tuki lapshik na de lu shiba ro lu shiba ge nyima nyiba de yimba chitsude thong do was tanda dina ne tage nga su ge khamchu le shu tang samnyung go kor chidus tar was tin zunda tang potela ti ko ge chechum chila ta sha yor was tanda imbara nga su ge so ta cherjong ra chi che de la yo pa de cherjong ngo che ne je la ya che chu ge zenda trip kap sa ne de ta che chu zenda na la ya kan da street thuma thila ya chi ta ge yes.
So we talked about feelings of happiness and of sadness and how what we are feeling may affect how well we remember something.
Handa tanda nga su bana gachu ge chowa latent ne gachu ge chowa ta gachu ge chowa ta tembe gune nga su ge ta changu chi bana kasu chi tre maten la ya shu che te yo pateng asu time bas.
And we want to look today at what's happening in the body and brain during those times.
Handa tanda tene do ge ta samyo tene do chong kapsa nga su ge zupu tang le pik na la ya kari chong yo me te ta yins.
It's not just the amygdala. There are other areas that are active.
Handa de kamchu le shu zamares le pak cha shi shenda ba na salon chi yo res.
So we're going to talk about some of the brain networks and the other body systems that are involved in fear and in reward. And we may not get to reward, but this is review, so you've seen this content before. We may just do fear.
Handa dada dena ne tambu de la nga su ge chi ngam ta chi ro ji ta te jong bi kap su nga su zupu ta le bag na ne ta mala chi na la ya ko le ka kan ta gu ji ge yo me te ta ge yin tambu te che ne te je la ya de ne nga su la che ta to na sa te la yo res im ba na ta da de chi jar jong is ta la ya ne chamal hen ko ma re tambu chi che ba na ji to ko ta ji to ko chi pu tin du san ko res.
Unlike some of the actions of the brain that we've talked about, like vision being processed in the occipital lobe, emotions are represented in the brain in a distributed manner.
Da kesanga zu sheba na shinde ani kasugure Karsa. What is the first one?
Distributed manner, it would be like all over the brain.
No, the first one.
Oh, occipital lobe?
Okay.
Vision in the occipital lobe.
Ngasuge thonsor chigorwa, thonsor te ngasuge tinana chigorwa, thonsor te ngasuge tangdab gnana ne ko isu chigores. Ne ta shenda ngasuge samnyo taw imba na lepegi chashi mampu chila ya ko khathor de ta isu chigores.
And if there's time, we'll talk about how nervous system activity is measured and how we share brain behavior relationships with other animals.
Ta da nga su chu chang ba na wan sa mala ge che go te kan ro che je go yo me ta nga su mi ta ne so cha sheng ba ro la ya ne le pa ta shi jo the ne ne chi de kan ro yo me te ta gins.
If you see this image, what kind of taste do you expect?
Da tanda de la ya par de la ta ba na chorang ge ta tro kan ro chi la ya riti chi sa res.
Is it something we want to eat?
Aso sani to chi re do es.
What if what you saw was not what it tasted like?
Tanda chorang ge thong wa de ne cherang ge thong ba de wa ne ti ngone ge tro kan ro chi yo ba ta ta mai na karin sa res.
What if this was full of sand and hot sauce?
Roa kete ta de roa ne chema ta ne te ga la ya ta khatsau tin da ge tro tin da lu sho ba na kan yo sa res.
When you first put it in your mouth, you might think that you are tasting what you thought you were tasting.
Da tampo de la ya khana chi bi kapsa ane chorang ge chi samlu na yo pate la ya tuanyang go yo sam garwas.
Our perceptions very much determine the initial information that we process.
Da nga su de shi tem ba na thoma nga su la ya chatang kari chi yo pa de la yese chi wala tene chong yo res.
Even if it's not what we thought it was.
Da nga su de nga su samba na shi memba ba na la nga su de shi tene ro chi le yo res.
We do something to demonstrate this with students where they see a pie and it has they see a pie and we tell them it is apple pie, a pie that they really like to eat.
Da lobtri jam to ji nga su ge de lobtri la ya du sta se chi de sha yes ta ko su thong wa de phai le stam ba la ya pa le ta tu ko ro chi re pa le chi re ro ta de na ne ko su pa le thong ba de ani ta ko pha ju de la ya shin to ku shu ti de tang zu shi ku shu ge zu sha ju ge ta phai se ko ro tu ko de res de se de jo ta ku shu ge tu ko tin ba na shu ge ba na ko su pe sa ya ga o ge pa le chi res.
And it has some of the ingredients, sugars and sweetness, but it doesn't have any apples in it. It only has the spices and the sweet.
Da te kushu gi su sha ju balere la yo re sim ba na te na kushu yo ma res ta ko la la ya kar su gore ta ngar je ta ani ko na la lu go ya ge chi ta je chi yo wa tu lu yo re ma to pe na kushu yo ma res.
And yet when we ask them, did you taste the apples? They say yes.
Da ga su thama ke je tre ka su charang ge ti na kushu gu tuwa nyang so e ke je stam ba nyang so sig dus.
So what you think you're going to experience can affect what you experience.
Da charang ge samlo ga na ne chi dangi nyam snyo da de na do chi injire samlo na tremba chi go wa te ge charang ge ngui nyam snyo de la ya shu chen tre res.
And if it's a pleasurable experience and we have that dopamine acting, you may even get a dopamine response to something that hadn't been pleasurable before because of what you're expecting.
Ta ke ti ro chi tu na ta da ba ga jam no ten ro chi ba na ne ga su dopamine te lo de ta te ge yang khu ga shu chen te yong go yo res ro te ane te ya su su ga ri ti chu ala ten de te ro chitang ge ten ro sa bi kap su dopamine lo chi ti ge she ku te ma pa ba na ya ga su ge ten ro chung go res ri ti chu ala ten de te ane ko dopamine ge che ku te ya du su tu yong ten yo res.
So now, having talked about that, I want you to draw these 5 boxes and show the order that they go in from the very beginning to the very end.
Da de la ya nga su de chi yes ga la ya chu nga yo se ge tu shi nga do wa de ne che so pang du ro chis tri chi pang du ro chis tang gu ko ne zu ko re ju ko dong ko re te pang du ro chis.
And use arrows and words to indicate the relationships between these boxes.
Da de ye ko tu shi de ta ka pa ro la yo wa ne ka sa nga su gan da ta ta chu pe che ta de ta khu chu pa ro lan de wa ka re yo me ti chom ba ji ro chis.
So for instance, with the apple pie, I might have student eats the apple pie and then say the taste receptors send signal to the brain to process the experience.
Da pi she cha pa na ngi lop tu la ya ta se de ba de tan de kushu ge pali sa chu wa ti sa wi ka se ba na ne pang ram ti ba na khusula tang po sa chi no ji la ya truwa te nyang no te truwa te tu se le pa la tang go si pang re chu wa te ta res.
Take a minute or two and we'll come around and see what you have.
Da ta ka ma chin chi na te chi ro chis nga su du skora je chi ta ga yong yes.
You don't have the English, and then it's going to be hard with Tibetan. But
Ta
that's
pang re du se na ko tri ta ran ja chi na ya shu ro ko ko du ta ran ja chi ne ge la se la ya dis do wa. Da ta ta
I'm going to pull you away because
yi ge tri ji ne de wa ti ta ro chi lag do wa.
translation skills.
Kana stand ko chi ta ta ran chi na ma re yamuna su su kana do kan ro ki na.
See what they're writing. And actually, how do you feel? Could I do the same with you? You feel like you could translate these things? Okay. You have a question? Yeah. So there's a question about evaluation, this one. And what that is your brain deciding what this information is about. That's your brain processing this information to make a decision.
하다 다다들라야 렌타저와 시사야시도와 렌타저와 세야데 저런 거 레빠공군의 차텐티 딱 배쳤던 거 됐다. 아니 탁간으로 지체 맞지 사야시고와 뛰겠네 던데레스.
So if that's helpful, I'll give you another minute or two.
this dambalaya tando kamachini chipayins.
there are some differences in opinions on this, and some of that's because it depends on how you interpret it and you think about it.
Dus kachila tabayin samala da tajo mazon skusuge ko lentang la dis mando chidus dis tambala yade yade kuge de keper chongwa de ro keper chongwa de ya chi ko lentang ta chi yo chi ta chi ro de mando la ten jong dus.
So for instance, with sensation and expectation, if you're going to have an expectation, you might have to see something first and then make an expectation on that, like the ice cream.
tanda de la ya chornyong ta riwa chi do ga chornyong ta riwa te yam bai na ani tangpu te la ya chi thong go wa thong ta tane riwa chi chi ya chi go wa te chong go res.
But then you'd also have to put sensation again, if that's the case. Because after you have the expectation, then you need the sensation to see what it's like.
Ya yang xiang a chu ge chornyong te yang xiang go yo res ta tangpu ko chu thong no go je la ya yang xie chornyong chi go wa te yong go res.
Do you want me to repeat that? Or
Yeah.
So, I'm just going to repeat that because I didn't have the microphone on. So, you might have sensation and expectation. You may have expectation first, and then sensation, because you are expecting something and then you're sensing something. But you might instead have sensation first, and then expectation, because you can't really get an expectation if you haven't seen the ice cream to have that expectation.
Ta tanda dig pangram chi go wa tangpu ni che go pangram te nga su go chornyong ta riwa sa chi go wa te chornyong ji le riwa yong na ko re riwa ji ne chornyong na di du sta pi sha pa na nga su chi chornyong chi ta cho la ten de ta ya te la ten riwa chi chi go wa te chi yo re ya shen ba na riwa chi de ta riwa chi o na ji ta chi thong ba na te la ten de ta chornyong chi go wa o te chung yo res.
And you might even have sensation and then expectation because you looked and then you thought about the ice cream and then you tasted the ice cream. So you might have sensation twice.
Da yang chornyong sa te thama nya wa ten da yo res tang po yong te ge la ya riwa chi te ge la ya yang se te chi ka su re yang se chi tuwa ta stam ba la ya chornyong la ya chi go wa thama nya la ten da yo res.
When I was going around, people even had expectation and emotional response because you're expecting the ice cream, so maybe you get happy. You're seeing it there.
Da ya dustru sta bala kha chi la ya yang riwa chi wala ten samyong go ya le chi wa ten da dusta pisha shana ta chhatri chi la ya riwa chi go yo pa ban na te thong wa ta ro ne nga su samyong go ya le go wa chi wa o ti ge ne tong te yong go dus.
Those are all valid ways about thinking about this.
Ta da te che su chi gomba shi ya te chi panram ri ya te ta da che su gomba je ta te sama ne di ge thela sam na tang ba ma na yang ko sam na tang tan du ba res.
This also demonstrates something about teaching, which is we can set something up thinking about it in a certain way, and then when we realize the perceptions and the ideas that people have, realize that it could be interpreted a very different way.
Da de ya ko lom se typic of se yang ko na ka cha ge res ta nga su in ba na de na do chi de ani ti na sing gi ru chi chi de ta thia la chi thap chi tang go yor wa in ba na ya lom sen la thup tu la du street chi chi stam ba la ya yang nga su ge tam ba na shi mai ba ko ge ne ta ti la ya chi ya chi ko la ta man ro ma pu yo ba de ani ne ta de ta nga su thong tu dus.
And that different way could still be right.
Da ko sam la ta man ro ma pu yo da in ba na te ta ya duk separes.
This is one of the challenges of teaching when you can't be with your students and actually talk to them about it. So if this were, for instance, a question on an exam, and I only had one right answer, it would mark you wrong even if you had the right idea from a different perspective.
Da dis ta bala ya de ta ne tam de na do de nga su ge ka su gre ta ta lo thu la ya nyam te me ani ko phan su la ya sam lu te ji ri chi ya ge ko ka chi me pai ba na de na do ani thia la ya ta chi ka nge yo res pi cha sha pai bai na ne nga su ge draw de na do chi ji to na ta sha che ne ji to na la ya draw de na do chi ta le ka chi ma shin ga yo ma wa ni stam bala ya ne lo tu ke len ram da je on stam ba ya lo tu ke su su sam na na nga ra ge chi ta de rig do yo sam bai bai na ya ta gela gi te la gela gi shi sha ta che bai ba na nor de wa o dis ta bala te la su su sam na rig do yo sam bai ba na gela gi len shi sha ba na nor de wa ne ta te yong go res.
You can't necessarily follow up on every answer that you marked wrong for lots of students, but if lots of students are giving you the same wrong answer, that's when you should definitely check in your assessment.
Da ya ta nga su chi lo tu ma bu yo sta ba la ya draw re lan la te ta ko ya chi ta ti la ya shu ta chi ya ta tu de chi ga ne ta te yong ko ma re sim bai na ya draw kha chi ga lan te so tu ma bu chi la no le ba ta chi so le go yo pai ba na ne chorong ga draw ti la yang chi sam ji tang go ti le go res.
If they are actually getting it wrong, then that lets you know that you need to think about and teach this in a different way and highlight it for them because it's a common misconception.
Da ke te yang kusu no tri ka sa draw ga lan no athe ba te yang thamong go yim ba ka yim ba ta ane ti nguni no yo pa ba na yang chorong ko thon se ta ngotro chi tang la jura tang go yo res kar chi la pa na ti tripi kapsu thup tu chula ya kunur chi thai de yo wa is tambala ne zende tripi kapsu cheshe chi wi kapsu ne ton ti tang dewa ti ko khase ngoi se gune ne nante gan de jogu yo res.
If they're thinking an answer is correct from a certain perspective, then you need to change your question.
Ta ke ti kusu tan to ba na samlu tang ta ti la tene de ta kusu gi twa ta norwa ti ro ta len norwa ti tan to dikyo sang yo pa ba na ne chorong go ne twa gi chi drta chi warwa o te la yan jura tang go yo res.
Or accept the multiple right answers.
Ta ti men ba na ya kusu la ya ta len tin dam da chi tab sha pa na len dik pa ti chi mai ba tama yo pa la ya kilen chi go yo res.
So in the diagram as we diagrammed it out, this is what that looked like. And notice you have sensation before your expectation, as some of you had, and you also have sensation before your evaluation.
Ta ta ga su ge remote charge de la dira do chin du sro ta de la ya ani kha chi la yo pa na shin re ani chorong la ya chor nyong te ri yo go ngo la yo pa tang chor nyong te ran thang tam pe go ngo la yo pa de yo res.
And both expectation and sensation are going into your evaluation.
Te na shin ge ga su go chor nyong ta ri wa ni ka te ani ga chor ran thang tam pe gi chol la du go yo pa de dus.
You're going to get a body response from your sensation and a body response from your evaluation.
Ta da nga su go lupu go yalen chi go ra lupu go yalen te chor nyong la te ne yong de sha ran thang tam pe te ne la yong de sha.
And as some of you pointed out, you might get a body response from your expectation.
Ta yang khashi ge su su ge ya riwala tere de ta ya lupu go yalen chi yong re se tak tin na jab shas.
The body response may play into the emotional response, and the emotional response may feed back on the body response.
Ta lupu go yalen la tene samyong go yalen chong atong samyong go yalen tene de ta lupu go yalen yo chong su bares.
This is only one possible model.
Ta de ka res stambala chong se pe gi ani pison chi res.
Other models can be made, and we can scientifically test those.
Ta ya dida do ge pes ge jenda zu chopa ka shila ya ga su ge chher ge ga na ya kula ya ta se chia yo res.
So there's no right or wrong answer to this. We have lots of different possibilities, and we don't know which one's the correct one yet.
Da de la ya lan ti driba ta nor ba sa tin yo mares ta di si be ge khorang ge ta chong tang do su ka dam ka ma so na chi dik tang man do ma pu chi yo res ro e ba na ta ga su ge ti na ne kan ge chin go ya ba ta kan ge chin do yin ba ta sing yo mares.
I'm going to show you some information, some data from studies that show some of these connections.
Da ko ge de ta pa ro la ya drewa kha chi ten bi the la ya ni ta se sim ji chi ti ku su de ta nye sha ju ge ni tang thu kha chi du su ngo chi ge yes.
There are changes in our body with emotion. Some of those include things like rapid heartbeats if we're anxious about something.
Da pe sha sha ba ba na ro nga su ge lupu ge ta nga su ge kar chi lupu kar nyang ma jang la ten de ta nga su ge samyong te chi ge res pe sha ba na ani chi te ke te nga su samchen do chi chong ba na ani samchen do chi chong pe kap sa nyang ge phadong te jor du yo res.
Or feeling nauseous if we're disgusted by something.
Chi la ya shem ba lok ba na nga su chi me la chi go ra te go res.
these body states, these emotions, affect how we think about things.
ta zupu ge ne pap tang asu sambe ge ne pap dege ane asu ge samlu kanda stang ma tang se ge ni tang de la ya shuchen te grace.
If I go up to one of your fellow students and I tell them, I'm going to scare you, then it's not as scary as if we're in a dark hallway and I jump out at him.
ta ge de ngara je loptich kandam la no da tangi cho shena ngok gi yin lab je shena ngok ba ba tin shena so yo mares da tili shenda pe te kura de chokkan chambu gun dursa ga lam ka to la na khonch kana ne thoja ga ja chon shi shena ngok ba ne te shena jigres.
It could be even scarier if I told them there's somebody who's been jumping and killing people in dark hallways, and then later on in a dark hallway jump out at him.
ta tando tili ko shena so kar chagre se stambala ya ane chi chomcheng ko julam to na khong na ne ya ane mi khashi chi ya ma chongsa je shenda se chi tin da jigdu se ane ngang to tel hon no go jela ya ane thoja ka jala ya na khon na tu chong yo bai bai na ane tili ngang to so jung gres.
The anxiety can cause a very different response because you remember the dark hallway, you're expecting maybe something's going to happen, you're not sure if it's going to happen or not, and then something happens.
ta ngang sap chi sano na ngang sap chi gorwa tila tene de te ane ko ge ta chi yalen te shi chwa yong gores ta ngang se tene ro che pa na tila tene ta nga su ge riwa chi gorwa riwa chi chi wa tene de te ane ta ngo se tene ro chi chong yong ba na tila tene de ta shi chim bu yong gores.
With a very loud, surprising sound, almost all of us will respond.
ta chi da yan sambu shi chambu tene ro chi chong ba na nga su chi lam sa yalen te gres.
But those of us that are anxious about it and worried about it will tend to respond in a much greater way.
ta te na ne chi samsi yo ba chi te la ya tampu ne nga tang do chi la ngunjin chi de ni mi tene ro yo ba na ko yalen te ta tile tili pe te shi chwa te gres.
And those of us that are expecting it and know that it's not going to do anything bad might respond less.
ta nga su na ya mi kha chi ke o de ta yong da yong gre sim ba na de yong ba na chi shu chi chen de chi ga mare sa me ge yang du shi tin da zen yo pa ba na yang ko yalen te yang shu chen bu te ga mare.
In the United States, they use that sometimes to find criminals who blow up areas with bombs because they can look for one person who doesn't respond like everybody else does and more calmly walks away.
ta ari ba na tan da de do ko ni tan de peche ta de ta ane ko ari ni ro ane tan da ni tan de do peche ta de ta ane peche jana sa cha kha chi la ya chi nga su ge ji gi ke ba chi ni ge da ni chen tin do yo ro tin da ane chwe la thap chi tang gre sa tin da do chwe ge thap chi tang ge kap sa kar chi go re sa na ane tin da do chi ni ge ni chen tin ba na mi jen da na jing ge yalen chi ge ma re sta bar jin do ke ba chi ba na jen da na jing yalen ma chi ba che ku chi lil ho ga ne chi bu ke bi kap sa lil ho ga ne chi kar su gre ta ku sum tal helo ga ne du gre.
Your body not only affects your cognition, but it also communicates your emotion to others.
ta nga su ge zukpu ge nga su ge ta samlu ge tang tang chi go cognition system ba la ya da ngin zeng ge te la ya shi chen to ba cha mai ba mi shen da la ya yang ko samnya je pe chi ya chi go wa o te la yang shi chen to gres.
So if I'm really nervous about the lecture, you might see me moving around a lot or sweating.
ta da ke te gar hlan sa thya la chi ngang san do chi yo ba na chi kari sor ge se na ga ya ma shu shu ngu chu tang yo ba ta ana ngora jro tu chi chu sor gres.
As you learned about, there are facial expressions that can happen in very short periods of time that show others what our emotion is.
ta da chi chu go nga su go dong ba ga nam ji te to kha chi le chi chu ta yo res ro dong ba nam ji te da ba na ko to ya te da ko chi san la tong gre da im ba na dong ba ga nam ji te la te de ta mi ti ge samnya kare yo me ge ni ta te to pa chi ro as.
This is important to us for the person who's feeling the emotion and also the person if they can see what emotion that person is feeling, because we can help them. If they're really anxious and we see that they're anxious, we can tell them things to make them more calm, to help them so that they don't feel as anxious.
That ke chambu chagores that in a dog some so the Sony Jim by not Sony Tige, Dombaga, Namjir Gandu Stones, Dambalaya, and the Pajo de la Mishendage, Takuti Sheba by na Pisha and Michi Chialaya, Angan Senda Uchichio by Bana, Tidombata Lubuga, Namjir Gangon, Dambalaya, Agenda to Sugoyan, Kuchil Hulach, Nash and Jam Chagi, Tapchitai or what is Dambalaya, the Chicotan to Batapazo, Shitkio, Patia Kachabris.
So this body communicating emotion to others is very helpful for us to help each other.
Hada things tambalaya ngazu lipuga namjila tenedete some ginyonsur ti pasulaya kuda trayachgoro ada trayachgoro tete ade ngazu mi pensala rokpa chegtelaya ane kechamburis.
Much of what the nervous system does communicating with other body parts is it is telling those body parts, but then the body parts are giving the brain and the nervous system information back.
Hada ngazu wansa malake zupu ge chashi khala ya karichi machi ge da tangrwa tinanse ge ngazu ge zupu ge chashi te takaya lepala ya datun tangores.
So we might see a snake and perceive that snake and then feel some fear or some anxiety, and our body will respond to that and then send signals back to the brain.
That picture Shabanga to Duchi Tomba in Bana, Duchi Tomba that ended the tongue as so can't the Senate Chungura, they on that any dating as Sugasa, Lepala, that Tangroa, Lepala, that no Latin, Lepaganku Yalanga Dachimanga Sulupula Tangres.
These three systems are linked directly via the nervous system and also indirectly to the brain. The autonomic nervous system, the endocrine system, and the immune system.
That under Deroa, and Asu Samuel Yalan and Devalaya, and Tandagi Dita race, Dita, and Kusujoy race, that Ambulang as Rango Wansa Malachi, Tijilan Name Malachi, Tijilan Nango Maladeta race.
We're going to start with the autonomic nervous system. This is a direct connection.
That Rango Wansa Maladelaya taken the virus.
And has indirect.
Dimasayanko taken mind be Junig in the virus.
So things that change with the autonomic nervous system are things like muscle contraction.
Tada Pisha Shabana Surango Wansa Malala Teneton taker ge Chindoyo Pate and Nasuga Shadram teach the Kumchiach or what it is.
And also endocrine activity.
De Shanda Kalana Suga Nome Malagayan Kushelichi or Asheguchi or Tiaris.
The endocrine activity is going to be the indirect because you've got hormones that are going to different parts of the body to cause changes.
That and then as soon Nome Malaki Kugalika Chitanting as Sugita Shola Shumasugurata, taken my by indirect like the Genichon. This Tambalang as Suga Menzit and Allergy data, Zupuchashi Kalanduguris.
You have two different divisions of the autonomic nervous system. One is fight or flight, and the other we call rest and digest.
Rango was a malala in Bambana Kolaya Chashimanda and Yore, statica races Tambalaya, Chilayang as to Tavern Druis, Rata Tavern Menandures, Yamna Shendatical and Yesunis, and did they get in Senores?
I don't know if this is translated or not, but this is the parasympathetic and the sympathetic.
The Pajotim Bana, you wish it's a malachit, Jotim Banachis or Malares.
Most of our organs have cranial and spinal nerves that go right to them. That's the direct pathway.
Asu Taker Julam Chita Juni Julam Chigor Sigua Jupi Julan. Taker Julam Bambana Asuga Zupuga Wampu Ma Chishilaya and Asulaya Didwa. Tori wants at the jumping wants at Taker Dojishayores. That did Taker Julam Teres.
If the sympathetic is activated, that fight or flight, our heart rate will increase.
The Pisha Bambana Asu Salayo Pigurwati, Chisro Malatila, Salonchio Bambana, Asu Taban Drusage Gorwa, or Titing Asu Salonchigures.
very often the parasympathetic response is the opposite. So if our parasympathetic is activated, we get a decrease in our heart rate.
Ta tanda nibi jiso malak cheli ti imbana ko geta jiso malak cheli ta doshore srwa ta kete nibi jiso malak ke ane nibi jiso malak te salon chi yo pa imbana ngasu ganyang ke pardon te ter dugres.
So if I come down and I suppose we jump at him, his heart rate is going to increase. Which system is that?
Ahata de on the dola ya toja ga shomba imbana ko ganyang ke pardon te jog dug yores ti kaps ane malak kangi chi salon chi yores. Sympathetic.
Yes, the
Jiso malak
sympathetic.
salon chi yores.
Here's how neuroscientists measure the autonomic nervous system response.
Ta de karana onsa saru page nga surango onsa malak ke yalente kana ro chenje yo megi ko takshi chitang res.
They can measure heart rate,
Ko nyang pardon te chenje kres.
and they can also measure skin conductance.
De papa ke jitu ni se tya chenje kres.
Because sweat conducts electrical charge, because it's got salts, it's got ions in it, more sweat will increase the ability of electrical energy to move.
This tambala yang asu papa nangla papa kala tombi ga ngura chi ro ngura ti bana ngura nangla ya chata ani jitu ti shi cho yo tambala khu nang ne lok dati jua shi cho yo res this tambala ya ani chi ngura ti ka so ma yo pa na ne lo ji bi ni wa ti cho yo res.
So a higher heart rate and more sweat is going to be more of an autonomic nervous system response.
Ta tanda de nga so ge chi nyang pardon chi wa ta ngora ma yo pa tela tane de ta nga so ge rango wansa mala te ko salon shi chi chi res.
You may have heard of lie detector tests. This is one of the things they use for the lie detector test.
Ta tanda chi chi ba na nga so ge chi ge jun xie te jun xie ge yo me tra ge tablan chi gorwa te chi chi na ku yo chi res ta jun xie ge yo me te tra ge tu chi na tele chi di be chi tang res.
And the idea is, if you're telling a lie and you're nervous about it, you're going to sweat more.
Ta te ge ku ge ta phajok ka su ta tap te do ka res stambala ya ani cherang ge jun chi xie jun ti xie te la ya ngang sa do chi chi yo pa ba na chola ya ngoro ma jong res ta chu te res.
The problem with that is, some people are just nervous because they're in being asked questions and they're going to sweat more.
Ta tela kanga chi pa ka res ta me khashi chi ba na ani ko tina do ko la dris chi wa sam ko ngang se chi chi ani ko ngoro to tina yong res.
So then they can't even get a baseline.
Ta tina do im ba na ko so la ya tina do ka so ta chi ba na mi tina la ta chi ba na ko so shi tu chi la rat ka mares.
And some people, because of the way their brain works, don't feel any remorse about telling a lie, and so they don't sweat more even when they're telling a lie.
Na mi khashi ba na su su ta chi la pa ga na ge chi ta ka tu ju la tin de te ani chi ga zma shi pa ba na te la ya ani chi ka su gre te la ya ma chu as gro ta te la ya jo pa me chu chi gro wa te na do ge ne ta na yong yo res ta tin sta ba la ya ku su zma shi pa ba na la ngoro tong ma res.
But for most of us, we will sweat more when we tell a lie because we'll feel bad about it, we'll be anxious about it, we'll be nervous about it.
Ta mi ma chi shi ba na zma shi pe kap se te la ya chi ngang se chi ta ma ga wa ma di wa chong ge yo sa ani zma shi pa ba na ani ngoro ma tong res.
So one study that was done at a university was to look at autonomic nervous system responses to pictures of landscapes versus images of violence.
Ta tanda de la ya lapta chkana ne kari chi ore se stambala ya ane tanda ge per chi dwa asu yijung ge per ta ya na de la ya chi ko mela dong dong tang no gu tshu chi gu no gu tida do per tan de ta de ta bi kap se asu rang wa sa mala de ne kanda do salon chi yo me ge ko la taksi chi de res.
And the question to you, you'll have a minute or two to discuss it and think about it, is this green arrow, this orange arrow, and this blue arrow, which of these do you think indicated landscapes and which do you think indicated violence?
Ta danda de la ya ane chonta ka chi do wa chonta de jangku chi chi li thi chi chi ngom bu chi do wa da ta se gor da gala man da ta do wa da ta sum thong do wa chonta ma do on de ta ge ane gange chi ga su yi jung tong go ba da gange chi ge su jo de la ya ane dong go yo su go pa chi do wa o di ta bi kap su ge le ti tang yo res.
Take a moment and I'll come around and discuss with you.
Conductance. 그래도 파조대 angasu가 연구 활동으로도 SR제 안에 수조대들도 conductance 법학이 로트하게 니바지거와 때리자 파조대 연구 활동시 수조대 법학이 로트비기니와
So Jillian just pointed out, and this is good to say about this data, remember when you were talking about the paper, these are the same types of data that were collected in that paper too, the amygdala paper. So that may be helpful in your thinking about this.
Can you repeat it again? Sorry.
Yes, so those heart rate and GSR, the sweat, those were the same measures in the paper that they talked about earlier today.
Da danda de la ta ba ba de la ya ning pardon ta papa ge jitu ni ba sa sto wa de ge tanto de tan shuba nga sula dola che so wa de ge tanto ta chi pa res.
This heart rate and skin conductance. Same. So this is typical information to collect.
Okay.
Actually, you've got that on your computer. You want to pull it up real quick and show them?
That's okay. I will tell. Yeah. Da danda de wa sirgin bana kusu ga taksi ta mambo chi go ra taksi mambo chi go ba danda de la yang su ga yang ga pardon ta de papa ge jitu ni ba de ta go wa de tangin de na la ta ba bana ga su ga Tana sobat itu cici rimu tampu tina tabai mana tampunya sembaca siapa tangapa ni sarwa siapa tangapa ni sari dua siapa ti mana papa kerja ni wace tangapa ti mana yang kepartner dua di stambala cerita ketak sesibu kapsul itu tahu yoris.
So this graph, oops.
Yes.
No, it's okay. So some of you are looking at the paper, and that's good because we want to look at lots of data. And somebody pointed out, yes, the paper that Jillian showed us has these same measures, but we're not seeing what we might expect in that paper in terms of aversion, because the heart rate actually went down a little bit. And this is something you see a lot in science, where not everything is going to fit exactly the way you might think. And you want to pay close attention to that data to say, wait a minute, if this doesn't show here, why might that be? Because if this is always what we get, we should always see an increase in heart rate. But in that Hammond paper, there's not an increase in the heart rate. There's actually a decrease in the heart rate with the aversive stimuli. Now that may be the, oh, sorry.
Tanda data by Bana as a ditches, or Chisuka Kashik and Nagasuka, so meet the Latagdu, so the Lataba in Bana, Dinanagasu, and younger person at Taba in Bana, than the Takpusukura, the Toshichi comes to Sugar, Banagasu, Samlanalaya, Toshichikasa, and younger person in Jordu, Palaya, Nasuka, what the Chigur was, some of the Chigur was in Bana, so meet Digan and younger person, Shaba in Bana. And the coach Topuchi we cups to the Chibi cups or control along Tinder long big cups in Bana and younger person as to Dubana Shinge. Taiko Yapagamadus, Machashas, the thing as to Dean Galana, as to Shimjik Soila Sopagia Chichires, in Santa Layako, Dubanashi Yango, Santa Malay, Duba Mebanas, the Dubanajima, but Macha on Goris, Titan the Dina Laya Chonshas.
So I already gave away, but you could probably guess, the violent image is the orange. The heart rate increased, it's going faster per minute, and the galvanic skin response went up dramatically.
That de la lente and system digital Johnson's that and the chits to this taba in Bana, as you can data and the electric Salman Dodge. Electric door de cups in Bana, and as you like per the Toshu per the 10 or is the take up sang as you can pardon in Jordan or Pajan Jordan was a good time, Jordan, let's say the Laya and a papa jitrigan what they threw what is Sashas.
And the landscape could be something that decreases your heart rate. So it went from high heart rate and now we have much lower heart rate.
That in Sambalaya, and Yajung Koita, as you can pardon the Chita on Shiro at Sambalaya, and the Chita on the race, Janago Pardon Chita on Sho delay Marchi Chantangrua.
So let's talk a little bit about the difference that we saw in the paper that you discussed with Jillian this morning.
That and the day Shopan Asuga, so much time, but Gajilla Motuchi, Tita and Diparolaya, Chapach was Telachitagins.
In that paper, in the aversive stimulus, the heart rate went down.
That and the Pertina Tabana, Shopagit, so meeting a Tabaina, aversive system of Contruchengi, and a Kuchentil Hebaina, Yanta Karsangatsu, and younger Perdante, Terdrushas.
But if you look at how much it went down, it did not go down by very much.
In Bainayaku, Mandriati much high the Katsucha system, Balaya, Shitamamu Chamidus.
It went down by about 3.3 beats per minute.
Daku much higher the Chabate, Kamachkanatali, and younger pardon the Sum Sasum Dochimachas.
Over a minute, that's not going to be that much.
That Karmachikuti La Taba in Bana, Sum Sasun Tankashambu Mares.
But it didn't increase a lot.
This time it did. It did or it
did not increase a lot.
The Mount Rumandus, Mount Compare this it a Mambo Permandus.
And that suggests that maybe the image they showed wasn't arousing the autonomic nervous system as much as this violent image did in this study.
That and the Pajonalaya, ya power tissue, permestabalaya, 아니 파졸라야 버타야디로와 아니 그 적부 그 남바디 디 난생 그 적부 시ට 매부 된다 노인스 바레스
It's the numbers, not the directions. These are both higher, so of course it's been interesting on higher numbers.
But it's changing.
Yeah, I know, but
Beats per
the
minute.
minus is the weird part because they're both bigger numbers, so I have to just check what the minus.
But it's changing beats per minute, so it should be.
I know it should, but I think,
Okay.
right, so.
So we're going to check on that and get back to you on it to see, to make sure. But it suggests that maybe the images that they were showing didn't have a huge response from here, but did have a big effect in terms of the amygdala response.
아한다다 텔라야 파졸라야 텐지고 퍼치고라 딘딘 나싱고 코살론 시쳔보 메파 이나야 아수게 감틀레슈고 야렌슈 쳔보 좀 아텐다 인스 바레스
So let's talk a little bit about some of the brain areas now.
아한다다 델라야 아수게 레파게 카 레파게 차코 카질라타기스
A big part of how the brain interacts for these types of emotions is the limbic system, which is subcortical, which means it's below the cortex or the cerebrum.
다 티카다 단당가 수게 야렌 딘다도 용야라야 아니 레파게 나네 레카치야 테치타기스 텔레 야렌 체게 레파 차시 땡가 수고 타콜 말락스 그레스 타콜 말락테 레피게 나쇼스 요레스 레피게 나쇼스 스타발anga 수게 레파게 레슈 요로 레슈 나로라 고고 요레스
These areas are involved in olfaction and memory, emotion, motivation, attention, and sensory processing.
아다 단단들 트샤주게 레파게 차시 카치도가 고수인 바이나가 수 디처당 잼바 셈용 근통 네 도나 아니 원술게 예세지 단도 요레스
And they communicate with the rest of the body through the autonomic nervous system and the endocrine system, or hormones.
아하다 단단가 수가 타콜 말라 되게로와 타콜 말라 되게 랑고 원사 말라 타야나 나메 말라 세나가 수기다 데르와다 멘질로니 투르와 오 코츠타 냠트 아니 코츠 준이데 땅가 수가 레볼라 도와치기 요레스
So you already talked a lot with Jillian about the amygdala, but this is important for detecting and coordinating responses to stressful stimuli.
아하다 감슬레슈 고 잠바탄데와데 쇼파셰샤 요레스 디 담발 단단데라야 감슬레슈 때가 수가 샘노 로야게 네트인테르카스 야렌테치고로 티 갑선 케챵부차기 요레스
This is just in front of one of your favorite places to talk about, the hippocampus.
아하티 단다 체수 셰바게 응엘라 치셰방아수 수타마치 셰바 디게 네 달로 타타라 요레스
And it's got strong outputs and connections to the hypothalamus that sends out hormones.
아하다 네 가사 하이포탈라마스 스탐발라 레부 오마티로와 레부 오마티게 아니 레부 오마티가 가수게 티가수 그레테 멘지티 가자 주푸차실라 땅고 요레스 틸라야 아니 드와시 샴보 요레스 감슬란시데
So here's the structure so you can see that.
아하다 델라 코파치탄샤 예스
There is a syndrome called Kluver-Bucy that is caused by damage to this area of the brain. Oops. In this medial temporal lobe and especially the amygdala.
तातांगा सुगे तिवा छातों लपरतने खमचग लेशुलारिया चुनशोरपालातिने देता यांको जुपला न्यामचन चिंग गोरेस तिक्वा देशी जगयस तेला
This syndrome, this damage, causes heightened sex drive.
तांदा दिने दोगे ता तंदु सिगुरा तंदु सिस्टमल सिंड्रोम सिगदो तांदा देगी ता कुगो शोंति चों बायना अनि ठिक्चु तिपेगियोरेस
Visual agnosia, which is being unable to recognize familiar objects or people.
다 ngochu tikchon tichong yoris ngochu tikchon system balaya ane namjin juyo chugo chala ta mi baina titang ngunzuma tipage chontiong gores
hyperorality, which is eating too much and eating things that are not appropriate to eat.
ta ya thetok sichu tiong gores tis tambalaya ti kardana chine chi khala te chipde cheliga sa ta shendatene namjin khala misaya sa manoy khala tene sa yoris
And a diminished fear response and low levels of aggression when something presents as a threat.
ta ya ngasuka sagre ra nyamchong ra sigdo ata piche chi jikta chambu tinado chomba na ya ko tila ya yalenta ane tinado nyoa yores.
So one of the things that they did in an experiment is they took the 3 highest ranked monkeys, the monkeys that were the kings of the troop.
ta tanda de kuzu tase cha tila ya ne tu na ne ta ko ge ta param chindu waro ta param thoshi ge param thoshi sung ge tu ki de te tase du yores.
And they gave them a lesion to this area of the brain.
ta tanda de la ya kuzu ge lepa ge chashi de la sakora ta lepa ge chashi de kamsi le shu ta lepa chashi jenda khachi to ga de la ya ani nyamchen tang baris.
So given what you know about this, take a minute or two to talk with your group and think about where they might rank after we take out this part of the brain.
ta tanda de ge lepa ge chashi de kuzu ne ma to bai na ro ane tampo bana kuzu pang ristambala ya tampo nyo simbar wa ta se toksum chagu yarwa ta tin stambala ya lepa ge chashi te la ya nyamchon tam bai na ane kuzu ndigna ne panum kawach gal hegres te la ya kama change kana to the churches.
Remembering back that this is going to affect these aspects of the animal.
ta lepa ge chashi te la nyamchon tam bai na ane samchen te ge shichu ge ane tan de ta la ya ane chonchi ge yores.
I'll leave this one up, but just remember that it's these top monkeys. Actually, I'm not going to leave that. I'm going to leave this up. So think about these top monkeys and those changes in the brain.
ta de shenda de ko ge lep ka sanga su ge shishu tan de bi ge chung karim bati sha sha ge sta tanda kangila ta de te la samtang gore se na tanda piu gang la ya sum do ta par ma sona par thu asik do ta rum thu ge ju sum la shisha de ta ane lepa ge chashi te la chon shor pa bai na ane kuchu pan ko al le gre se te ga samtang chis.
And now that you have an idea of these 3 and what they normally do and what the monkeys expect of them, I'm going to give you the brain region changes.
ta tanda te la ya tampu te la ya ta ko ter ma sona thua yo pe ge stress ma ta sai bas ta tanda ane ko ge lepa ge chashi de la ya chon shi bai na ane shuchen ka resto me ge ne tande de la ya sha sha yes.
They've got them up. Good.
Kaza lag do kaza ma de tambo nya simba
Okay, I'm going to bring us back. As I pointed out as I was talking to some of the groups, there are some key things when this part of the brain is damaged that can affect what's happening with these monkeys in this group. One of those is a diminished fear response and reacting with low aggression to a threat.
Tanda dela dus tambala ya tude chig dusta tanda dela ya lepa ge chashite la ya chenchi ba imbana kola ya shuchen kare to mechi wo dela ya nyamchung ran sa teres ne kola ya ne namjen jiktla ya len chia de yong ko nyonya chia tanga de na senge ne ani chi namjen nangje chi kontru chho me chi goran jambu cha ge chini tant chongores.
Another might be that visual agnosia, the inability to recognize familiar objects or people.
Ta shenda ka na nguchu tkhishon sa teres de ko nyongde chengeng yobo ta mi bana ro samje de na ngum shi ach gorwa o teres.
So let's think about this social hierarchy.
Ta da de ko ge chitsok terem de la chita gos.
So Dave, who's in the top position, is dominant and self-assured and feared by the other monkeys.
Da kora tanda da dev ze te tabain bana ko ta phala ya te tangzhen chi dominant je ani susu ge ta rang thong chenbu se gora se fa shu je ni de je la ya ni shen da ge ngam ta chi sa chi res.
So he may not respond with robust aggression towards somebody who aggresses on him because of the removal of this brain area.
Ta tin stambala ya ko ge ta ngoma bana chi phala ya ta yalan te chi tokpo gona chi go yorwa ta tanda ko ge lepa ge chashi te me pertans tambala ya ngoma na je chi tokpo gona yalan tig marwas.
But that may not matter because who's going to go after him?
Imba na ya te chon shi te chi mares ko ge jela dunyi yo marwas ko la nye zanyi yo marwas.
So he's missing this brain area, and if somebody attacked him, he might not respond very well, but nobody's going to attack him.
Rwa ta tanda ko la ya keti ko la chi jenda chi ke chi ngogo do che ba imba na ta ko ge yalan ta ngoma na je tig marwas imba na tanda ne kap de la ya ne ko la ya ane chi ge ta ngogo chi yo marwas.
These two, on the other hand, are holding their positions because they're very actively aggressing on others.
Da Quran bana tige nywa ta sambati bana ta Quran la tanda ge neram te la bas ko ta Quran te la ba te garchin la gore sistam balaya Quran be te ko ta shenda la ya ta ta chiktag lang ya ta shenda la chi go yorwa ta chi ta chi shin ba yin sang Quran la te la de yores.
If we remove all of the areas from all of the amygdala areas from all of these monkeys at the same time, then probably some of these would start to challenge and aggress on these and not get a response and move up in the hierarchy.
Ta tanda ge nga so ge ni ba te ta sambati ge na ne ko ge kam chi la shu ge chashi ta jenda kha chi la ya ta nyam chen tang bar wa ra ti tan tam bala ya ta Quran in da win ba na wo la yo chi ge piu tu zu ge ne khu chu la ya ta ngogo do chi ngogo chi tam bala ya ni ba ta samba in ba na ko la nam jin na jeng ge ya len chi ya takpo gana yalan chi ate yo marwa shikshang bu trigu yo marwa tin stambala ya ola yo ju kha chi ne kuchu ge ta teram te yang khore chinthon run khores.
If we remove just the brain area from this one will probably aggress and move up.
Ta ke te nga so nyo te chipu ge lepa ge chashi te ko pai bai na samba te ge niba de la ya ta ko kar su gore ta control la ya ta ya rang go chi de te ane samba te niwa ge sala ya koram te phand khores.
And then others will see that this one got defeated and then maybe go after him too.
Ta shenda sama ge tanda ge niwa te ta family chongwa te thons tam bala yo khusu ya yang she so ko la ya tan jang se gora jing che de ta khusu ge yang neram te yang phand khores.
So this demonstrates how brain areas can be very important in how social systems are organized. But it also depends on where you are within the social system. how much effect something has.
That is Tambalaya, Nasuge, Chitsuki, Nanlaya, Chiga, Nathan Canado, Chila Yome, Niram Kawachila Yome, Tela Yang Asuga Lepag, Shishan Canado, Chigio Metitsongores, and Timadaya, Masu, Shenda Tenishepa in Banaya, Asuga Chikasugre, Masu, the Kawa Yume, Chigorwati, and Chutso Rangi, Nanlaya, and Chiga Jendalaya, Tenia Chaguyores.
If these two had their amygdalas removed, then when this one defeated this one, it might feel strong enough and good enough that it's actually going to challenge Dave. And if Dave is missing that part, this one might rise to the top.
Ta keti nga su tamputan nyawa ten shage le pag chashi te ko bayin bayina ta da sambati ge nipate la ya ni ko donglan chi de te ku phamber je bai ba na nyawa te phamber je bai ba na ani sambati ge ta khorang la ya chi niwa chin du sam chi de te chi che bai na ko ge ta thoshi su ro ta dev sa te la ya yang ko ge jang de te yang ko chi che bai na neram de na ne ta da sambachi go ro wa te noren thoshi te la yang les paris.
So just like the genes and environment discussion that we had yesterday, it's not all about the brain, but it's about the brain and the environment and how they interact.
Ta kesang asu ge rigje tang khoi ke chi shelin don to kola ke chi she ba sti nan shen ge ane de la ba na ko le pa chi po maris le pa ta khoi gi ni cha ge ni shu chen kan da thamong go shi chen kar te go me te la ra le go res.
These changes are not just seen in monkeys. This is also seen in people. And I mentioned this person earlier who had both amygdalas removed and was not responding to things like snakes in a way that you might expect.
Ta de la ya te nga su sam chin sa ma ba mi na la ya te chong yo re te nga su ge tan de ne tan de kesang ngo to chi chi sta ti sta ba la ya de ge ne kamtsu le shu chi ro kamtsu le shu ni sha te ko thola do sha re sma pa ta sha re te sta ba la ya ne tan te da do la ya ane nga su ge ri wa chi na shin khu ya len tet ke yo ma res.
So which of these is patient SM? Which one is the one with the amygdala removed?
Ta da de la ya nga su ge de la ya di o la ya thir ni do thir ni yo chun de na ne thir kang gi chi ani tanda ne pa SMSH do khu ge le pa tan drevi ge thir re do sta khu ge le pa na kar yo mare se ne kamsu le shi yo marwa.
This is the strength of the emotion here on the y-axis. And yes, I hear B. Yes, she doesn't have a strong fear response.
Da like those kashi de la be like those ta pi tra re sta na su ge de ge thir ga ta ba ba na jong tik ga la ya ani ka re se na samyong gu shi se te re do wa ni samyong gu shi se te la che ani sarputi ga su ge jikta do jikta la ya ya len ka na tema te do wa des ta ba la ya ta ne pa de la tam ba na ku ge jikta la ya len shi cham te kam do was.
We also use our amygdala to process what we see in people's faces.
Da nga su kamsu le shu pe che tang de ta mi jen de ge dong ba ga la ya kari thoma thong te ise che la pe che tang res.
So if we see a fear response in someone, we see activity in the amygdala.
Da ya mi jen da chi ke chi nga ta la ya len te ge yo pa te nga su thong ba ba na nga su ge kamsu la shu na la ya je gun jong yo pa te nga su thong yo res.
These are those recordings of where activity increased in the brain in response to faces that showed fear.
Da de la ya tanda de ge par ge le pa na ta jap sa te wa ne chi ge shen na ta shen na yo chu ge dong pa ge par la ta bi kap se ne le pa na la ya salon ko chi yo me ge le pa cha shi te res.
We can use animal models to further look into how the nervous system is working with emotion.
Da nga su hon sa ma la ti ani sanyo ta nyam te lika kana ro chi ge yo me ge te tra la ya ne nga su ge shen da ka sa so cha ga te le ta she du student kores.
As Jillian pointed out in the paper discussion you talked about this morning, we're not going to do those things to humans for ethical reasons.
Hada shoba genjilen lagi sombana shende tanda ti ngasu ge takshe tizu ane mi gala dukuyo maris madra bate ngasu ge kanchu ge neton la tene dukuyo maris.
There could be arguments to not do those things even to other animals.
Te ane shenda ngasu ge karsa tina dawu ge takshe te yang samchin shenda gala yam drum machwa segura ta madra wachia ge yang ko gazak tantena yoris.
And if you become a scientist, you can still discover things without doing that, but it may limit the speed and the ability to investigate some of the things that are happening in the brain.
Hada tanda chera chari pacha cha bai bai na tanda data la ya ane chiga kasugure takshe ngis machi wi gane yang dena do senye chong age ne tantin jong gre simba na yang ko senye jia te la ya ne tisu jarang pong korea ta ane chiga nang khu ge ne tanti yang ko to kha ba tin ne tang yong gres.
But that's okay because Buddhism is not in a race to the finish.
Da tanda dis tambala ya ti digi race kachila bai na nang shin bai na ko chicken dendru na shig de ta thamatile sutho ko yore tag yo maris.
That's more of a Western thing.
Da ti ka race tambala e na shopa ge chitan chires.
So when we do these experiments on animals, we can take out parts of the brain or leave in parts of the brain to see what was that part really doing.
Ta tanda nga su ge samche gala takshin de tribi kapsa nga su ge lepa ge chashi te la ya chashi te mar tom bata ya na chashi te la ya nyamchon tang de te lepa ge chashi te ge kari chi ge yo me chi ro ko ge cheli te la ya ndu start kyores.
We can also record electrical activity from the brain.
Ta nga su lepa ne ne lok ge da chi ro lok da te nga su chenjet kres.
And we can look at different chemicals in the brain and how they change in different circumstances.
Da leping na la yo pi ge ji kar yo me ta ane ko ne tang mando ke se je de ta la njro kan da dur me ya ta kres.
We can change genes in the brain to get more of a certain chemical or less of a certain chemical.
Nga su ge leping na ge rigji le jwa ta de ta ane rigji kha chi ma to lo ji ga ta kha chi chi nyo ta ya chi kores.
We can insert a syringe and add that chemical.
Nga su ge leping na la ya khap chi ma chu de ta ane guya ge ji tin de ma ta khan cha yores.
And we have techniques where we can cause neurons to fire at different rates that we want them to fire at.
Ti ma se ni tanda nga su la ya leping na ge ta wan sa thas gu yor wa ko su ge tanda linju ni wa tnya chi yor wa linju ni wa tnya chi ga da chi ta chi yor wa da ta ya te la ya nga su gun do pa na da ta thu ya ge ane chi chi yor wa tu se te yores.
Or to stop them from firing.
Ti ma se ane yang na ko tanda da tang yo pa te cham sha ge chi ga te yores.
But a lot of these techniques require that we go into the brain of the animal or that we kill the animal to see what's happening.
Ta tanda dina do chia la ya chini kal chi gore sena yam na nga su samchen te ge lepa ge ta kha sha chu chi lepa ge na lo zu gu yores chi ba na le karsa samchen te se de ta ne lepa na karin jong du te ta gu des.
New techniques are being developed all the time, and so there are some techniques now where we don't have to break into the brain or kill the animal.
Ta thablan sawa tin da tanda ba na jong ton jong shen ba res ta thablan sa ba na ne thablan kha chi ba na nga su khal thablan kha chi la ten de te nga su ta samching ga le pa sha chi na lon zu gu ma re ti na jin samchi se gu yo ma res.
Like this one, where we have fMRI, where we can look at the brain activity without having to go into the brain or killing the animal we're looking at.
Ta picha sha pa na de la ta ba na nga su ge cheli du per chi go ro cheli du per di kap sim ba na nga su ge mi ti ge le pa nan zu ma go ta ya na mi te se ma gu ga ne le pi na la ya ne ku chang gu te ko an jung du te tat ki res.
But there are big limits to what we can do if we can't get into the brain.
Ina ya ta nga su le pi nan zu ma ti kap se ane nga su kare chi chi thu ma ti te la ya che ka chen bu chi yong go re ka ja chen bu chi go res.
And you'll see that with what we can say about the brains of other animals versus what we can say about the brains of humans.
that teaches Kola Tongre system, Balangatsuki, Samchin Shendagi, Lepacola Katsuchi Shingu Meta, Miguel Lepacola Katsuchi Shingu Meti, Deshajapi Capsa, and Chitu Sekaranjante, Tontokures.
With new technologies developed over time, we may be able to look at some of those things without having to go into the brain or kill the animal.
Tuchi, Yaji, Duatantene de Chichabain Bananga Sugi, some just Semaguatan, Lepin and Zumagu Gane, Lepaginangi, Cheletan, Chatetalaya, and Lila Hogan, Tatapayung Grace.
And if you go into science and technology, maybe you'll be the one to develop those new techniques.
Chichabaina, Chetukete, Cheso, Yan Serita, and Atsuturiki. Dinsendelaya, Lobjan Chimata Dubai, Bana, Chichabaina, Tirado, Trichigoro, Tirado, certain Chiniti, Choran, Inspiris.
And we'll thank you for it because none of us like to kill the animals.
Mahata get the Tindachong by Bananga Suchizulaya, Tuchi Sugar, Yens, Karchila by Bangasunane, Nichi Samchin Seni to Nichi Yomaris.
But we feel like it's something that we should do so that we better understand how to help people.
Time by Nagasu Karchigores, Stampalatanda, Samchi Sayati Yonguyores, Sanchi Sayat Station, Tatashishan, Riwakarichigores, Stampala, Tina Chipalatendete, Negasugi, the Mila Secorata, Mila Yakipen Champuchi, Dretuagariwatachigores.
So in the last little bit of time we have, I'm going to talk about fear potentiated startle.
Tada Delaya, Kama Kastilasha, Dika Sangasugi, Delaya, Castella, Jilong Dongusa, Delaya, Deshijagins.
This is a classical conditioning setup that tests the role of learning and memory to emotional responses.
That day, so Dekalana, Samuel Yalen, Kasungatsu, Shijun, the Jambalaya, Dokana Ruchin to say, take a Tatabge, Nico Karsugurita, Tashichires.
I first want to remind you of what classical conditioning is.
That Delaya, Nasuke, the classical condition is the day in Bana, Dido Karsata, Nasuke, Condris Segumento, Tajunkomdra, or Tikari Metindishagins.
You take an unconditioned stimulus, in this case a foot shock, that the animal does not like.
That day, Karsa, Titisha Karsa. That unconditioned system Balaya, and Eco Karsugurita, Chachin Mapasagurata, Chachin Mapagi, Nivachiris, the Tikari system Baladic of Sembanuku, Kambalayata, Oloke, Lochich Tegua, that in Banaco Gagamaris.
And you pair it with a conditioned stimulus, which is something that the animal doesn't really care about, but if it's paired with the thing it doesn't like, it starts to associate it with that unconditioned stimulus.
That Tilaya, Negasuki Chachinta Dembasco, that they go Chachinta Dembagi, and Yendachi Tango, Resrata, Tampotelaya, Chachin Mapagate, Kolaya, Kuchinchite, Titan Yamta, that Yendachi Tango, Jendachi Tango, that is Tambalaya, change and the Techitan Kula Chapter, Yomarim Banayam. Cool Magaya, Chachime Picent, Chachi Picent, Chanyap, Yampatan, Stambalaya, Nesamgenti, Chachim Takars, who conditioned Secorata, Colaya, Chachin Chengi, Nathan Tempicas, Nanti Magot in Jungures.
So the light comes on and the animal gets a shock. And the light comes on and the animal gets a shock.
The Karchigores is Tambalo, Oiti Parwatan, and Tandagale Tichua Samchentela, Lochiki Tegiores.
And it learns light is on, danger is ahead.
That Kukarets Shigures is Tambalaya, a long Parbaimana, and the Yankalego, but the Kugajangores.
This is like what I was talking about earlier when I said if he knew that there was somebody out there in the dark hallways trying to kill people, he might respond bigger because when I jump out at him, he's already thinking this is a dangerous place to be.
Tate Tangi Deshajapana Shreketi, Nakona Dostroba Bana Michi, Senichi do say, Netante Haku Chene, Kunduvi Caps, Gelatoja Chonji on Bambana Kolaya, and Kuga Casa Yalent and Anta Suchuanguras, Titan Rodes.
The difference is these rodents like the dark, so they're more comfortable in the dark than in the light where they used to get shocks.
That and the Dela Yopigata, Samjeko in Bayana, and it co Nakon Latis Gauyores, Kachila Bayana, that Nakome pickups, wait on Bambana, Kusula, Lochik to take your wa.
So when we give a lot
that take up so kusu na kono ne de la ya kusu ya da chenbu chi tang bai bai na kusu chongcha ja go res.
But when the light is on, they're really expecting something dangerous, and when the sound goes, they jump along.
Ta ta da de lok per gro wa lok per we kap se ana kusu ge chi ta riwa chi as ko ra ta chi nyang ka chi yong gre se riwa chi go yor wa riwa chi be kap se ande jalong ne dach tang bai bai ne pe de chongcha ja che chenbu chongcha ja go res.
So scientists can use this to make changes in the brain and see, does this animal expect something to happen and they jump really high, or are they not really expecting anything and they're not anxious about it and they just jump a little?
Da chen ru ba ge kusu de ta se chi go yor res ta ge de kurang ge chi riwa chi chi yongre se riwa chi sim ta chi jingna za yongre se riwa chi sim pick up se ta jingna ga da ti chong pa ba na chenbo phopa ta tina do jingno chong gore se riwa tre ge khori te me pa ba na pick up se da ti ta pa ba na ni chi ya chong ya ti nywa yo me chi ro wa te ta ge re sen ru ba ge.
As you might expect, the amygdala makes them jump more.
Ta che chu ge riwa chi wa na shen ga chu kham chu la shu ge ku chu ta chi ge thumbu chwa chi ro wa ti ge chen chi go res.
And if we lesion the amygdala, then they don't respond as much.
Ta nga chu ge kham chu la shu la chon che bai bai na nyam chen dang bai bai na ane ku chu chong cha ja te tin da nang jin chen bu chong yo ma res.
So we can use this behavior without asking these animals, were you anxious about this? Because we know based on the response of it.
Ta ti sa bala nga su ge sam chen ku chu la ya chorang chi kar sa sam chen do jong sa se te ke chen dr ma gu i gang de wa ku chu ge ya lan te tang la ten de nga chu ni chen de ha ku yo res.
We will see you afterwards in the afternoon.
Ah.
Make sure you come with your analogy assignment because you're going to be presenting your analogy assignment. So be ready for that.
Ta nyang kong do nga su zombie kap se che chu la analogy de na che theng gar wa che theng le pa tang che theng ge pi chun chi sha chi wa o ti che chu de la ngo to chi gu res ti ta ri chi phe ro nas nyang kong za da yong za na.
And enjoy your life.
Oh ya ne she la tu na ro ches.